Hi, everybody. If you have not been watching the optional videos that I've been posting on the agendas every day, this will be the first time since Tuesday that you have to watch one of my pre-recorded videos. So I learned something new. I learned how to put GIFs into Google Slide presentations. So I think I have a new theme for next year. So if you guys have any favorite GIFs and you want to see them if you want to see them make an appearance in next year's hug presentations, please send them my way. Like, I'm kind of obsessed with these kids dancing. It makes me happy. And I feel like we all need a little bit of joy in our life. Originally, by the way, these children dancing here were meant to celebrate our less than 50 days till the AP test. But I don't know that we have less than 50. I don't know. I don't know what's going on anymore. Anyway, um, April 20th. This is not supposed to be a 4. This is supposed to be a 3. So happy March 20th. Okay, so the purpose of today's discussion is to prepare you to complete your City Models Jigsaw. So remember I said this is the unit of models. It is the unit of models, and here's where all of the models show up. So there are a couple of key vocabulary words that I think I need to make sure that everybody understands before you embark on trying to understand the models themselves. And you can kind of see what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Central Business District. I'm going to bring back bid rent theory, and we have to talk about the role of edge cities as well. So just a little setup for your independent, no, I shouldn't say independent, for the jigsaw that you guys are going to do for me either over the weekend, but it has to be ready by Monday. Okay, so these urban land use models. So there are 7 models that you're going to have to know, and they all share some common characteristics. And it's going to be your task to identify these characteristics, but also explain how these characteristics manifest themselves just a little bit differently in each of the models. So they all serve to classify and categorize land use in urban areas. They describe how land uses are segregated spatially. So essentially, these models talk about how space in a city is used. And they also offer explanations for the location of different urban land uses. And I'll get a little bit more into that when I talk about the American models in just a second. The underlying principle for all of these models is the concept of functional zonation, where portions of urban areas or regions or zones within a city have a distinct purpose. So essentially, these models provide a framework to describe and understand and analyze cities. That is sort of the overview of the urban land use models, all 7 of them. Okay, so we need to start with a central business district or CBD conversation. I'm hoping that you can recognize this city. This is, of course, our gorgeous city of Chicago. And I always ask students to think about, like, when I start talking about this in class, I would ask you to tell me, what do we call this area? Like, what is this area of Chicago called? I mean, this is all Chicago, but this part of Chicago has a very specific name. And that name is, because you can't answer the question, is downtown. So CBD is like a synonym for downtown, the business district of any particular city. So this is where all of the business of a city happens. Like, some of this is residential, some of it is recreational, and so on and so forth. So again, we're talking about like how cities are sort of organized, but all cities have the area, the economic kind of area of the heart of the city, which is my next bullet point. I didn't realize. So yeah, so the CBD is this commercial heart of a city. And what's really interesting about CBDs is that they tend to be really small in comparison to the size of the overall city, but they contain a highly disproportionate concentration of services, right? So what's happening in these buildings are people are providing a service, accounting, law, etc. You get the Okay. So again, characteristics of CBDs. This is the area of the city that's most expensive, little preview to bid rent in just a minute. It's the area of the city with the tallest buildings. It's the focus or the node for road and rail transports. If you were to look at a map of Metra going into the city, even from the surrounding suburbs, like all of them head to Oglesby, or the other station. What's the other station? I travel into Ogilvy. I don't remember. It tends to be the busiest place Monday through Friday, because the CBD tends to shut down on the weekends, because most of the people who are in the CBD are actually working there, except for places like shopping, like Michigan Avenue and State Street are probably still happening in Chicago. You could always go and watch a show downtown in the city. It tends to have the financial or banking heart of the city, but this is where all the offices are. So like some of those services, like restaurants and coffee shops and breakfast places and newspaper stands and so on and so forth, they tend to serve the people who are working downtown. So those areas, because the threshold changes on the weekends when people are not commuting into the city for work, those places tend to close down. But in general, CBD is the area with the highest thresholds and the highest range. And so the downtown area is the thing that draws the most people and has the most services available. And now, bid rent theory is applicable to both urban and agriculture. And as you know, the like closer you get to the city, in this case, the city center or the CBD, the higher the cost of the land, and then the further away you get, the lower the land rent changes. It becomes less. So technically speaking, if we look at this bullet point right here, because CBD is so expensive, the land is so highly valued, it's really hard to like live in the CBD. There are, of course, office spaces in the central business district, even in Chicago, but the vast majority of the things that are happening in the CBD are businesses or commercial use for commercial purposes. Now, I think this is a good question. I'm going to answer it for you, obviously, but why would businesses pay such a high price to be closest to the CBD? Well, that's because the CBD is where, like everything happens. And so I like this too, or the greatest draw, I should say. It's kind of like the busiest place of a city. So when we look at the concentric zones here, if you look at zone 1, that's the CBD where all your commerce and offices are. You move out a little bit, maybe you see some industry there, and then by the time you get to 3, this is where you're going to get your residential. So this would be like where people are living. So the different like areas of the city, like Greektown or Lincoln Park, or fill in the blank. Okay. Now, let's just talk about the models really quickly, and I'm not going to give you any information on these models because you are going to provide the information on these models, and I am giving you a ton of resources to use. So there's 4 American models, and I generally don't highlight the importance of dates. I think I did for Borchert's, and there's a connection between the American models and Borchert's model. So I wouldn't say that you have to memorize the dates necessarily, but I would certainly memorize the models in order of the earliest to the most recent model, because these models are going to show some trends over time. They're going to show how decentralization begins to happen. So the concentric zone model is the model where like the city center is still like the most important part. And then by the time we get to the galactic city model, you're going to see that like people are moving outside of the cities and you have the development of these suburbs. And I'm going to talk about an edge city on the next slide. And all of these models change or evolve over time as a result of better transportation. So I want you to pay attention to how transportation influences the creation of these models. That's going to be your key to understanding how the models work together. Yeah. Okay. So edge cities really quickly, because this is another term that I just want you to know, particularly because this is the place where we live right now. So there are like little downtowns consisting of clusters of businesses and activities that have developed in the surrounding suburbs. So the central business district doesn't have as much importance as it once did, which is not to say that it's not important. It still is. It's still the biggest node. Make no mistake, Chicago is the most, prominent city in the state of Illinois, of course. But people are moving out of the city, away from the CBD, and you're seeing like these like mini little edge cities. So these mini little cities spring up in places like, for example, Schaumburg or Oak Brook. So if you go to Oak Brook, you can see all those office buildings are all clustered in the right area, and it's sort of a hub in the same way that Chicago is, and Schaumburg is the same. Um, so less residential and more office and retail, et cetera. So that's what an edge city is. And when you get to the galactic city or the peripheral model, it has two names. You will see how these edge cities develop over time. And then for urban city models, these non-American models, you guys have to know three. So there's the Latin American model, the Southeast Asian model, and the African model. Now, these models are very different than the models that you're seeing in North America. They just don't function the same way, or they don't evolve over time in the same way, but they do have some characteristics in common. Like all three of those models are built to facilitate segregation. So not just, kind of people segregation, actually. So when you see those models, you'll understand more what I'm talking about, but it's also business segregation as well. And then also a lot of them are hybrid cities where you're seeing a mixture of an indigenous and colonial and globalizing influences. So the cities change over time based on how connected they become, I guess, to I don't know, the rest of the world, I suppose. I don't even know if I said that right, so maybe discount that last part there. So your task is this. In Google Classroom, I have put you into groups of 7 or 8, and each one of you in that group is going to be responsible for a city model. I also shared a Google slide presentation that you have editing rights to. So you need to research your model. The picture is already there, but you have to describe the model. You have to talk about the most important features. There are some models that have very specific terminology associated with them, like beltway, for example, needs to be defined for your peers. There is a handout also linked on the assignment page where you can see detailed instructions of what exactly you have to put in the Google slide presentation. If you need to add more slides, you can totally do that. On Monday, the only thing that you guys are going to be doing is taking notes on the model presented by your groups. And then my task, hopefully you guys will join, but on Monday during our office hours, I'll be around to answer and clarify any questions that you might have. On the stream, it's going to be obnoxious actually, but on the stream for today, you will notice there are a ton of resources. There's YouTube video resources, there's textbook resources from another textbook, and then there's from 2 other textbooks, and then there's also your own textbook. So use all of those resources to help you become an expert on one of the models that you personally have been assigned. And again, I'm around if you have questions. I said this in the last slide, but because y'all don't have to watch the last one, I really do kind of miss you. I miss teaching. I don't like this is I'm done with these lectures, so I miss your little hug faces. All right, talk to you soon.